And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are continuing our study of the Olivet Discourse. We're bringing this study to a close after 619 videos so far. We've got a few to go. And listen, I do appreciate the fact that so many of you have sent me suggestions for our next study series. And as I've mentioned to you before, some suggestions are a little more attractive to me than others. Others, no offense intended, I won't mention any of them, but literally have no interest to me. That doesn't mean they're not important. That doesn't mean they're not good. It's just that, they don't hold a great deal of interest for me at this time. Okay. But I have had a good number of suggestions. I'm going to be going through them and see if I can prioritize them. I can say, no, not that one, not now. This one is intriguing. This one is intriguing. I've had recommendations for a study of Israel's feast days, which I must confess to you is really, really exciting to me. I'm not saying that's what it's going to be. Others have suggested, how about a study on what now? If covenant eschatology is true, where are we? I've had suggestions to study the book of Hebrews. And as I told this fellow, he's a friend of mine, if I undertook a study of the book of Hebrews, that would be a minimum of 1,000 videos. Yeah. Man, that would be a study. That is to say, if I did it verse by verse. I mean, Hebrews has been one of my favorite books for years and years and years. I'm really attracted to that in one way, but in another way, I just don't think it's feasible for me to undertake a verse by verse study of the book of Hebrews. I could do it thematically. I could do it by chapters, topics, themes. I just don't know. So keep making your suggestions. If you've made a suggestion already, make another one, okay? Because I haven't made up my mind yet. And it's very possible that one of you will send in a suggestion and I will look at it and go, bingo, that's it. That's what I want to do next. All right? So keep those cards and letters coming in, as they say. All right. As I suggested to you yesterday, it is absolutely critical, and make no mistake, I've touched on this before. It is absolutely critical for us to understand the proper context, the proper framework for properly interpreting Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following. Now, one of the great Greek philosophers, one of the greatest minds in all of history, a mathematician, said, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." Now, what he was saying was, in philosophical terms, if you have a firm foundation for your intellectual development, if your foundation is good, solid, and true, then the building that you build upon that will more than likely be solid. It's not guaranteed, but the foundation is everything. The psalmist said in Psalms 11, verse 4, 5, somewhere along in there, if the foundations be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? Well, that applies to society. It applies to our personal lives. It applies to math. It applies to virtually everything. We're seeing a situation in America right now in which the moral foundations of America are under attack, in which we are told up is down, down is up, right is wrong. This is nothing but an overt attack on Christianity, on all religions who hold to those primary, basic, fundamental principles of morality and right and wrong. So, off my soapbox now. if we miscalculate, if we wrongly identify the proper context in which to interpret Matthew chapter 25, we are guaranteed to have a wrong interpretation of Matthew 25. Not just verse 31, but the entire chapter. Here's what I mean. In the amillennial and in the postmillennial world, it is believed and taught, sometimes quite stridently, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, number one, is about the end of time. Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, number two, is about the time when Jesus, as a 5'5" Jewish man, riding on a literal physical cumulus cloud, comes spiraling out of heaven to either destroy literal physical heaven and earth, the amillennial view, or to renovate the physical earth. If you haven't been watching my series on why N.T. Wright is wrong about the redemption of creation, redemption of the body, please do yourself a favor and go there. Just look it up, why N.T. Wright is wrong on the redemption of creation. N.T. Wright, along with a host of other scholars, very reputable scholars, all of whom are good men, they believe that Matthew chapter 25 is the time at which the current Christian age comes to an end, and Jesus comes to renovate physical earth and rule and reign over a utopian earthly kingdom. Point number three. Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is interpreted through the matrix of the view that says Matthew chapter 25 is all about God judging the church. At the end of time, it has nothing whatsoever to do with Israel's last days. Wait a minute. Remember what we've been seeing? Matthew 25, 31 and following is based squarely on Joel 2 and Joel 3, which was a prophecy and a prediction of what would happen in Israel's last days. So you have two opposing views. You have the view, which I am espousing, that says Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is about the events to occur in Israel's last days at the time of the end of that age, which Joel identified for us in Joel 2 and 3, and which Peter identified for us as something that was supposed to happen in his generation. Save yourselves from this untoward generation. And the other view that says, no. Matthew chapter 25, 31, it's about the end of time. It's about the judgment of the church, or the judgment of those who reacted and responded either positively or negatively to the gospel during the Christian age, but it's at the end of the Christian age. It has nothing to do whatsoever with Israel, because God was through with Israel at the cross. Let's see here. If it's the case that Matthew 25, 31 and following is based upon and anticipated the fulfillment of Joel 2 and 3. See, Matthew 25, 31 is a prediction of the climax of Joel 2 and 3. It is a prediction of the coming of the Lord. It is a prediction of the great and the terrible day of the Lord of Joel chapter 2. In other words, if it's a prediction, if Matthew 25, 31 and following was going to be the fulfillment of Joel chapter 3, verse 1, in those days and at that time I'll gather all together all the kingdoms of the earth, then guess what? That means that the coming of the Lord in Matthew 25, 31, and 32 is the great and terrible day of the Lord of Joel 2 and 3. Which again, Peter posited for the first century, not the end of the Christian age. So I hope you see what I'm trying to set forth here. And let me make this observation. I have said this in several of my books. And I will never forget in one formal public debate that I had with a Church of Christ minister in Indianapolis, I think it's 2008, somewhere along in there. John Welch got up and literally mocked and ridiculed and smirked at me and quoted one of my books in which I said, there is no New Testament eschatology. All New Testament eschatology is the anticipation of the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Oh, and he just, he was just beside himself in his pomp and ridicule. He wasn't so arrogant after I quoted several New Testament passages in which the New Testament writer quotes from the Old Testament promises made to Israel about the day of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, the new creation, etc. He didn't mock that idea anymore. He knew it had been refuted. He knew it had been falsified. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is extremely critical. Anytime we attempt to divorce New Testament eschatology from God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, we are going to have the wrong concept of eschatology. In a formal public debate that I had with Steve Gregg in Denver, Colorado some years ago, I quoted Acts chapter 24, 14 and following, where Paul said, this I confess to you, that after the way that they, that is the Pharisees, call a sect, so worship I the God of my fathers. Believing all things that are written in Moses, the law, and the prophets, there is about to be resurrection of the dead. And I pointed out, Paul's doctrine of the resurrection was from the Old Testament, the hope of Israel. And Steve Gregg, great guy, okay, very cordial, very circumspect in the debate. He got up and said, no, Don has it wrong. What Paul is saying, I believe all things that are written in the law of Moses. I also believe in the resurrection, as if Moses and the law and the prophets never foretold the resurrection. I was stunned, literally. Daniel chapter 12 predicted the resurrection. The feast days of Israel predicted the resurrection. Isaiah 25 predicted the resurrection. Hosea 13:14 predicted the resurrection. Joel predicted the great and terrible day of the Lord, the time of the gathering of all nations to judgment. So, let me reiterate. If you have an eschatology that attempts to divorce New Testament eschatological prophecies and promises from God's Old Covenant promises and prophecies made to Old Covenant Israel, you are doomed to have the wrong eschatology. I'm out of time. I'll pick up on this again tomorrow because it is so absolutely critical. I'm going to chronicle for you. I am going to document for you that all New Testament eschatology, including Matthew 25, I've already proven it, but hey, all New Testament eschatology is nothing but the anticipation of the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. So I'll see you on the flip side.